Morning, Dan and Amy. We were talking about the confirmation hearing of Dr. Tom Price, Trump's nominee for HHS. Also, before the firing squad yesterday was Oklahoma Attorney General Scott Pruitt, who is, of course, Trump's nominee for EPA, one of the real targets of the Democrats because of their adherence to the religion of junk science and environmental extremism. In addition to Betsy DeVos, I'd say those are their top two targets in terms of really trying to make political points, score political points. And so it started with Ed Markey. He's the other socialist senator from Massachusetts, not named Pocahontas, getting right into the whole climate change hoax and Trump's lingo on the topic.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This morning, NOAA, NASA, has declared 2016 the hottest year in the 137-year-old record that has been kept. Donald Trump has called global warming a hoax caused by the Chinese. Do you agree that global warming is a hoax?
I do not, Senator.
So Donald Trump is wrong?
I do not believe that climate change is a hoax.
Okay, that's important for the president.
And what's also important to note there, per Scott Pruitt's answer, is this false binary that the left puts out, that some people believe in science and some people don't. Some people believe the Earth's temperature has slightly increased and some people don't. Everybody agrees with the data that has been established, right, that there has been some slight warming. Where the disagreement comes is the Chicken Little approach that we should impose draconian taxation and regulation, and we should eliminate the fossil fuel industry, versus a more measured response to what are knowable potential problems with where we understand the temperature to be moving. That's the discussion. It's not a dismissal of data that has been established.
But don't you think more research is needed to determine how much of global warming is man-made?
Well, here's the thing. It's so interesting you bring that up because Richard Rahn has an excellent piece in the Washington Times where he said, because what's one of the left's talking points on this? The science is settled. The debate is over. Well, if the science is settled and the debate is over, then why are we spending hundreds of millions of dollars investigating this? Why then shouldn't we defund NOAA and NASA or greatly reduce their funding levels so they can just be scriveners and record data as it is established rather than do all of their complicated modeling, much of which has turned out to be well off the mark? But why are we spending all this money if the science is settled and the debate is over? Exactly. We should continue to pursue science, but we should use the scientific method. We shouldn't use political demagoguery, as you saw on display at Pruitt's hearing. Here's the other thing about this, about all these hearings, but this was most pointedly on display in the exchange between Pruitt and Comrade Bernie. What the job of a cabinet secretary is, an agency head, what that job is, and the exchange between Sanders and Pruitt, and you'll get where I'm going.
Senator, as I indicated, you weren't in here during my opening statement, but as I indicated in my opening statement, the climate is changing, and the human activity contributes to that in some manner.
In some manner?
Yes, sir.
97% of the scientists who wrote articles in peer-reviewed journals believe that human activity is the fundamental reason we are seeing climate change. You disagree with that?
I believe the ability to measure with precision the degree of human activity's impact on the climate is subject to more debate on whether the climate is changing or whether human activity contributes to it.
While you are not certain, the vast majority of scientists are telling us that if we do not get our act together and transform our energy system away from fossil fuel, there is a real question as to the quality of the planet that we are going to be leaving our children and our grandchildren. So you are applying for a job as administrator for the EPA to protect our environment. Overwhelming majority of scientists say we have got to act boldly, and you're telling me that there needs to be more debate on this issue and that we should not be acting boldly.
No, Senator, as I've indicated, the climate is changing and human activity.
But you haven't told me why you think the climate is changing.
Well, Senator, the job of the administrator is to carry out the statutes as passed by this body and to
comply. Why is the climate changing?
Senator, in response to the CO2 issue, the EPA administrator is constrained by statutes.
I'm asking you a personal opinion.
My personal opinion is immaterial.
Bingo. He's an administrator, not a legislator. He is enforcing the laws that are passed by Congress, not doing what we've become accustomed to from the fourth branch of government, the bureaucracy, unelected as it is, and promulgating laws, doing the, filling in the legislative proposals with kind of the regulatory framework, but really de facto legislating. And what you're hearing from Pruitt and others is to say, my personal opinion doesn't matter. I'm going to enforce the laws that you pass. That's the responsibility of the legislative branch. That's the responsibility of Congress. I'm an administrator, not a legislator. That is an important distinction that is completely lost on the Democrat senators in all of these confirmation hearings. And I thought that was a nice moment for Scott Pruitt. But we've got some other talking points to debunk, or at least challenge, in addition to the ones we have already. And to help us do that, we're pleased to be joined by Sterling Burnett, who is a energy and environmental research fellow at the Heartland Institute, heartland.org. Sterling, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me on. Gosh, hearing those Democratic senators blabber on in ignorance or flat out lying, it's just a little, infuriating. Sanders says 97% of the published research says climate change is caused by human beings and we've got to act radically. That's just a lie. 97% of the published research, the data he's citing, this particular research that he's citing, said 97% of the published research indicates humans have some role in climate change. Not a majority role, not that it's terrible, not that we've got to act radically, but some role. Scott Pruitt acknowledges that. So does Donald Trump, by the way. The opening quote by Markey was a one-off Twitter release by Trump that he later said, look, it's a joke. I know climate change is happening. Everyone knows climate change is happening.
Well, and I want to just
knows because climate always changes.
Right, and
always changed.
But the 97%, I want to get to that because this is again a talking point you hear again and again. In addition to the debate is over, the science is settled. 97%, 97%, 97%. Every Democrat, just about, says that, starting with President Obama. And I know the Heartland Institute has debunked that statistic. Explain why that is erroneous. What that's predicated on, that 97%.
Well, some researchers from Australia went out. It's actually been repeated several times by different researchers doing different methodologies. But the one that's most famous is these researchers from Australia went out and supposedly reviewed the entirety or the vast majority of the climate science literature, and they found something like 13,000 articles on climate change. Now, it turns out that not 97% of those 13,000 articles said humans were causing climate change. The vast majority of them didn't talk about any attribution for climate change. And so they were just thrown out. Anything that didn't specifically talk about humans and climate change, they threw out. So a lot of studies that didn't think humans were a part of it got thrown out. So then they've got a minority of these studies, and they looked at them and they said, well, it mentions humans and climate change. Do they attribute it? And 97% of those studies attributed at least some role for humans. But like I said, not a majority, not 50%, not driving climate change, just some role. And even then, it was up to the researchers, which were a lot of them were grad students that were just going through these surveys, and they were comparing each other's results, saying, well, what do you think of this one? Even then, they included a lot of studies that were from climate skeptics who don't believe humans have a very important role in climate change. In fact, they were called out by specific researchers who said, hold it, you said my study says this, and it doesn't say this. The guy who ran the study, John Cook, he admitted, we did shoddy research. But the journal that published it did not rescind it, despite the fact he says, we did things that when you're doing surveys you don't do, like cross-checking between your different people saying this is this confirms our hypothesis, like going back in the middle of it and gathering new data as opposed to starting with data, going back in the middle of it and gathering new data, new studies and stuff to supplement your findings.
Okay, so Sterling,
they had bad methodology. The guy who ran the research said it was flawed research, but the journalists left it out there, and everyone's picking up on it, and they're not looking at the details of the study.
So Donald Trump, with the help of Pruitt, he wants to, within the first 100 days, cancel job-killing restrictions on the production of American energy, including shale energy and clean coal. Is that going to hurt our environment?
It's going to help. It's going to help our economy and not hurt our environment. That's the thing. These Democrats think that if you're boosting energy production for Americans, if you're making energy cheap for Americans, if you're creating jobs for Americans, somehow it's a zero-sum game and you're hurting the environment. But in fact, market economies do better for the environment. Wealthier people, when you make people wealthier, they spend more on the environment than closed economies.
In addition
We're
to
the worst environmental disasters in the world. They're not in market economies.
Well,
right
in
now,
addition,
China.
they're
choking on it in China.
In addition to that, though, and importantly, I mean, we've had some environmental disasters here, the Exxon Valdez, Deepwater Horizon, but to your point about natural gas specifically, because that fracking question was asked of Pruitt by Bernie Sanders, the incidence of earthquakes in Oklahoma, and is that a concern that directly related to fracking? Well, that's something to be addressed wherever the science leads. I don't know. But we do know that cheap natural gas has resulted in the percentage of people's incomes that Americans spend on energy being cut almost in half in the last 30 years. And that's directly attributable to cheap natural gas because of what's happened in Pennsylvania and North Dakota and Texas. Fracking, where now from 9% to 4% of your household budget. And that's real savings for, middle income and lower income Americans when they're paying a smaller percentage of their budgets for their energy needs.
Well, and also, which I'm sure Sanders didn't bring up, the fracking revolution has reduced carbon dioxide emissions. While our energy use has gone up due to cheap natural gas, our carbon dioxide emissions have gone down because despite natural gas being a fossil fuel, it puts out relatively little CO2, much less than the alternatives. So more natural gas means less CO2. Sanders is somehow unhappy about that. In addition, when you look at the earthquakes, the science is, I won't say the science is settled. I think that's a terrible term for science.
It's never settled.
If you look at science, it's supposed to proceed by question and answer and falsification. But what we do are pretty certain about earthquakes is it's not due to fracking itself. It's due to wastewater disposal near fault lines. You avoid wastewater disposal near fault lines at high pressure, you don't cause earthquakes.
All right. He is Sterling Burnett, the Environmental and Energy Policy Research Fellow at the Heartland Institute. Sterling, thanks for joining us. Always appreciate it.
Thanks for having me on.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.